Hey guys, and welcome to or back to the Paws in Pursuit podcast with your host, Summer Clark. Happy Wednesday again, guys. You know what? It is finally nice weather. It is finally not raining and freezing, and I'm loving it, to be fair. What have I been up to in the past week, you ask? Honestly, not a lot. Sorry to let you down and be boring, but all I've done over the past week is spend the Easter weekend, so 3 days of the Easter weekend, basically revamping my entire field. We had to move my equipment, redo my fencing and build a new course. So it was a big job, but yeah, it's more than worth it to have my own little slice of agility to teach and train at. So that is what I've pretty much been doing. And we haven't had much time for anything else, to be honest. Everyone else was out having fun competing and I was doing all the hard graft. But yeah, really nice to have it done. It's looking, because it was looking quite worse for wear. So it's looking all nice and fresh now. After 6 months of the same fencing, it was time for a revamp because I used the netting. And obviously we've had lots of wind, rain, etc. So that needed redoing. And then the ground was starting to wear a little bit. So we just moved it over. So the ground is nice and fresh now as well. And obviously with that, we had to take down the current course, move it over to the new location and then rebuild a new course, which is all done now for both me and Arrow to train on and also for me to teach other people as well. So for those of you who don't know that I have my own venue and I teach agility, my field is fully fenced and kitted out with the Gallican dog walk and A-frame and Weslow's doggy jumps. And every fortnight I set a brand new course from one of the EO or AWC 2026 judges to help myself and Arrow prepare for the summer and push my students to their limits. So I do offer both one-to-one lessons and group classes in Lincoln, LN6 postcode by the way, to suit all abilities. So if you're interested in training with me at all, please do drop me a message and we can have a chat and think about maybe booking something in. I would love to help you guys get into this season, kickstart it well and reach your goals for this year by the end of the season, ideally. So yeah, please just pop me a message. If you want to see videos and photos of the field, then you can do so on my social media at Paws in Pursuit. If you want to have a look at what it looks like as well, get a bit of a feel for it, see how it's fenced, stuff like that. So that is pretty much what I've been doing over the past week. It took 3 days, but the rest of the days of the week were just normal teaching, etc. But today, it's not going to be a very long episode this week because while I'm recording this, it is 10:30. I have training in 2 hours and then I'm teaching this afternoon and evening. So did I leave it till last minute? Yes, I did, but I just have been very busy. But today I thought I would quickly run through training aids with you guys. So I've had a few questions since announcing that I now work with Safe Stride Solutions from people asking, what kind of the training aids they offer. What are training aids for the different pieces of equipment and the different behaviours, and how to know when to use them and in what circumstances to use them, because I think some people are a bit confused thinking they're just cheating, they're just ways to make the dog, do it in training. And I don't think these people fully understand how they're used, that they do need to be phased out, how to phase them out, stuff like that. So I thought I would go over that briefly with you in this week's episode. So let's crack on. So the first, and also before we begin, pretty much all training aids enforce muscle memory for the dog that eventually allows them to replicate the correct behaviour in the absence of them. Okay, so with all training aids, you don't want to be leaving them on forever. That is not the point. It is not so you can go clear in training and feel good. That is not the point. The point is to use them to enforce muscle memory so the dog's body and brain gets used to doing a certain behaviour in a certain way, so that then when you start to phase out the training aid and eventually remove it completely, the dog's brain and body just knows what to do due to all the repetitions they've done in the past with the training aid, if that makes sense. Okay, so when I discuss the different types of training aid now, you will kind of know in what sense muscle memory is enforced in each scenario. So the first type of training aid is a dog walk and A-frame stride regulator. So obviously on the dog walk, it's a lot shorter. And on the A-frame, it is a lot longer to match the contacts as they are. Basically, what you do is you pop it literally on the contact. So for the A-frame, a lot of people either have it on the colour change, so where for example, on my piece of equipment, My pieces of equipment are blue and pink, so some people would have the stride regulator on the line that changes from blue to pink, and others, I'd say the most common one, is on the first slat of the blue after the colour change. Okay, so they're the most common places to put it on the A-frame. Dog walk, I'd say, is a lot more varied as to where people put it. Okay, there is, and even with the A-frame, there is no one size fits all. And often with my students, well, always, it is a lot of trial and error. So we'll try it, say, in the most common place. And then if that doesn't work, we will experiment with different places. I can also usually gauge where it wants to be by just watching the dog go over the piece of equipment without any training aid. And often I will video it and slow-mo it so I can see where they're striding too short, where they need an extra stride, where they need to take a stride out, stuff like that. And I'll use that footage to decipher where to try the stride regulator. So essentially, for contacts, use the stride regulator when the dog is leaping or missing the contact due to a shortened stride or all shortened strides. Okay, so for example, on the A-frame or the dog walk, if the dog is doing we'll use A-frame. So if it's a small dog and they're doing 3 strides down the dog walk, which is correct, most small dogs do want to do 3 strides down the dog walk, and medium dogs like Arrow too. Generally, again, there's no one size fits all, but generally, they may be doing that correct amount of strides that you do want them to keep, but each of the strides or one of the strides is too short. Often, they don't get enough air going over the apex, so they're not reaching far enough when they're going over the apex, and that first stride down the down plank is too short. And then that leads to them being too high up when they do their other strides, and they end up, even though they've done their strides, it does not carry them down to the contact zone, so they miss the contact. Okay, so again, the dog in their head probably thinks they're doing it correctly, and you want to be rewarding the correct amount of strides, but they aren't actually hitting the contact, which obviously we want to correct. So that's one scenario where you'd use a stride regulator. Same for the dog walk. They may be doing the correct amount of strides. They're just too short. They're not extending properly. And that stride regulator basically just gives them something to jump over and then land where you want them to land, which is ideally on the contact zone. Okay. So that is one scenario where you'd use the stride regulator. You'd also use it if the dog is just leaping, so quote unquote being naughty, or just too excited and aroused, just not thinking, just absolutely pinging, leaping off like halfway down the down plank, over and over again. So you'd pop the stride regulator in, and that would give them something to basically jump over to hit the contact. So if they were leaping from halfway, you'd probably put the stride regulator slightly higher than that, so they have to jump off earlier, but therefore end up hitting the bottom of the contact, if that makes sense. Okay, again, very dog dependent. I will keep reiterating that. And some dogs as well just don't have very good striding at all. So maybe they're not actually striding at all. Maybe they're doing little strides. So, for example, if you are retraining your dog's contact from a 2-on 2-off stop or a 4-on stop to a running contact, and they are still used to tottering with loads of little strides down the down plank, you would use a stride regulator to again give them something to jump over where they land on the contact. You can also use more than one stride regulator. Okay, so it's quite common for both the dog walk and the A-frame to have 2 stride regulators. So one around colour change or a bit higher, and then one at the top of the down plank, so often just after the apex of the A-frame and just after where the top plank joins the down plank on the dog walk. Sometimes it is directly on the apex, or that join in the dog walk, but again, dog dependent, usually a bit below. And this is commonly used, so 2 are often used in conjunction when it's more than one stride that is the problem. Okay, so if one stride's just the problem, you just use one. If several strides are the problem, you may use 2. Same thing, you may use 2 if the dog is kind of doing loads of little strides down the down plank, and they just need a lot more help to lengthen those strides. It just forces them to lengthen the strides, and then they understand what is expected and they become comfortable with it. Okay, and eventually they do that every time. Okay, so again, a bit like the tottering down, if they are retraining from a stop, you can use a regulator when the dog lacks the confidence and subsequent drive to carry them to the bottom of the down plank. So dogs that are just not very confident, and Arrow is like this, on the pieces of equipment will not have the confidence to lengthen their stride, or the drive to carry them to the bottom of the down plank, okay? So in this scenario, putting the stride regulators in place just gives them that little bit more help and clarity to allow them to be more confident. And with confidence comes speed and drive. And with speed and drive comes extension and momentum that carries them to the bottom of the down plank without overthinking it. Okay. And you can also use regulators for contacts when the dog is still new to contacts and is executing them inconsistently. Okay, so maybe sometimes they do have a great contact without any training aids, but then sometimes they don't because they're still new to it. Okay, so you can pop them in to increase their consistency over the piece of equipment, okay, because we can't move on and make things harder until we've got, in my opinion, at least 95% consistency on a piece of equipment at a certain stage. Okay, so it's quite helpful for new dogs, dogs that are new to learning a certain piece of equipment, a certain contact, and that just helps them, again, improve their understanding and increase their confidence. And often it doesn't take very long for these kind of scenarios to take them off completely. They pretty much, I think, especially when a dog is new to something, unlike a retrain from a stop to a running where habit has been built over months or years, dogs that are new to it haven't formed those habits that are hard to break. So usually when a dog is fairly new or younger to the piece of equipment, then it is easier to phase them out and you can do so quicker as well. So also, just worth noting, the dog walk stride regulator can also be used in conjunction with the mat. So for Arrow, I trained him with the mat method for the running dog walk, and I had the mat at the bottom and he was hitting the mat, but because he lacked confidence, his striding was all off. He was doing lots of little strides. So we popped 2 stride regulators on that down plank in the positions that suited him, and kept the mat there too. And then we'd remove the mat when that was better. Again, when his success rate was 95% or more at that stage, we'd remove the mat and just have the stride regs, and then gradually phase out the stride regs until there was nothing. Okay. Some people also use a mat to teach a running A-frame. I did not. I generally say if you wait to introduce an A-frame until your dog has learned how to perform a running dog walk, it comes pretty naturally, so you don't need a mat. But if you also use a mat to teach running A-frame, obviously same thing, you can use the mat and the regulator on the A-frame, then take away the mat, then phase out the regulator. But by phasing out the regulator, so this applies to all training aids, phasing out means not just suddenly taking it off for good and never putting it back on again. Phasing out means doing, so say all of your repetitions are using the training aid for a while. You would start to phase it out by maybe 1 in 10 reps. You would take it off and do a rep without it. Then 2 in 10, then 3 in 10, like that. Okay, over the course of several sessions, several weeks, even several months. Okay, and also be aware that if your dog just has a weakness with a certain piece of equipment, there is nothing wrong with keeping the training aid there in training at all times. Okay, I'd say try to phase it out first. If you can't, and as soon as you phase it out, the dog reverts back to the incorrect behaviour, and you're giving it a good go of phasing it out and it just is not working, then there is no harm in keeping it on consistently in training. Okay, because then when you do go to competition, at least your dog will expect the training aid to be there again and has a better chance of hitting the contact, if that makes sense. I mean, if you cannot phase a training aid out at all in training, this probably means that there is a training issue going on, which is worth looking into. But I always say to my students, there is no harm in keeping training aids there in training, and just having them off in competition. Again, it's very dog dependent. I personally like to at least try to phase them out, because my goal is eventually to not need anything like that, and the dog just understands the behaviour with the cue and the piece of equipment in front of them. But yeah, there's no like hard and fast rule that you have to not use any training aids for the rest of time at one point. And you can also, every now and again, even with an experienced dog, add a training aid back in. So for example, if your dog knows how to do an A-frame or a dog walk and is pretty much 100% or at least 95% consistent hitting those contacts now, but maybe you've noticed that their hits have got slightly higher over months or years, or you think, oh, actually, they could be a bit deeper, then you can pop one in, you can pop it back in. even if the dog, like for with Arrow, for example, there was a setup at training the other week where he had to turn slightly, soft turn off an A-frame, and I was running ahead for a blind, and the angle onto it was obviously fine, but the way Arrow was executing the sequence, he went on at a slight angle, just because of how he was turning from the previous jump. So we popped the stride reg back in just to encourage a deeper hit, because he was hitting at more the top of the contact zone, whereas normally he hits in the middle. So usually, like I said, so we just popped it back on for that sequence and then took it back off again. So, you know, you can always put them back in if you think, oh, you know what, they can go deeper, or this sequence, you know, it's difficult for them to hit deep with this sequence for whatever reason. Maybe there's, like I said, a soft turn off it or whatever. You know, there is no hard and fast rule that once you've phased it out and taken it off, you can never put it back in again. That is not how it works, okay? So that is a bit about dog walk and A-frame stride regulators. Now we will talk about weave guides. So weave guides, I've never personally used weave guides, but I have seen them used before, and I've also used them with some of my students, and they've been really helpful. So for weave guides, you use when the... Can you hear my stomach? What the hell? It's lunchtime. It's not, it's 20 to 11, but anyway. So weave guides you would use when the dog is entering, for example, the second or third gap instead of the first, okay? So, for example, your dog is fine at the weaves, but they really struggle with open-faced entries. They always seem to go in the second or third gap instead of the first. You can pop your weave guides on. So again, it's hard to explain weave guides, but essentially they attach to the first and third pole, and then the third and the fifth pole to create a channel, essentially, through the weaves, which forces the dog in the correct entry and keeps them in for those 1 to 5 poles. And then obviously the rest of the weaves, once they're in, they're in. They tend to do the rest of the weaves pretty fine. They're usually, well, pretty much always used when there is an issue with the entry. They can also be used for the end of the weave. So if you've got a dog that is popping out at weave 10 or 9, for example, missing the last 2 weaves, which is quite common, you can pop them in at the end as well, just to encourage the exit, the end of the weaves, to be done correctly, consistently, and so the dog doesn't pattern and create a habit as well. A lot of it is about making sure habits don't form, because dogs, Arrow's a huge patterner. If they do something like twice, 3 times or more, generally they're gonna have a good chance of patterning it and want to do it again, and the more they do it, the more the habit's formed, and the harder it is to break that then, okay? So popping in a training aid like this just breaks that habit, okay? Even if you only have it on for a few reps and then take it out again, that habit, that pattern should have been broken by the guide, okay? But generally, when the dog is entering the second or third gap on a open-faced weave entry, they're super helpful, because the weave guide physically blocks the second or third hole gap in the weaves and only leaves the first one open. They can also be used when the dog struggles decelling to go in the second gap, if that makes sense. So say they get the weave entry, but then they can't decel and they end up skipping the second gap, okay? So they skip a weave, essentially. They get the entry, but then they go too wide and go in the third gap instead of the second. The weave guides, again, create that channel and just stop them going too far. Okay, they have to put the brakes on because there is a physical channel there. And remember, training aids are made of soft, safe material that's not going to hurt the dog, obviously, if they collide with it or catch it or anything like that. They'll just notice that it's there, if that makes sense. So there's some scenarios where weave guides are used. They can also be used when the dog is entering the weaves with the first pole against their right shoulder instead of with their left shoulder. So again, we all know the dog... To weave correctly, the dog has to enter the first weave with the first weave on their left shoulder. If they're entering with the right shoulder first, the weave guides again break that habit and stop them from doing that, because the only entry that is actually open is the correct one. Okay, so they have to enter with their left shoulder to enter the weaves. The entering with the right shoulder against the first pole, that entry is blocked off. They cannot do that. Okay. And then also, again, a bit like the contact regulators, they can be used when the dog is still new to the weaves and is executing them inconsistently. So say they're still very new and they kind of do get it, but again, they're doing some reps wrong, or they're not 100% confident, or they're going quite slowly through the weaves because they're not certain. The weave guides can just create that certainty and that clear path that they've got to take. And then after they've done that several times, they'll be like, that's right. That is what I do every time. That's what I get rewarded for. So when they're taken away, again, it's muscle memory. Their brains and body will go, this is what I did for the last however many reps. I'll do that again because it earns me the reward, if that makes sense, okay? So training aids, again, are very helpful for dogs that are nervous, anxious, overthinkers, sensitive, shut down when they're being corrected, okay? So if the guide's in place, it almost forces them to do it correctly, therefore they get the reward. That builds up their self-confidence, self-esteem, because they keep getting rewarded, and heightens their spirits, and just stops you having to correct a lot of reps in a row, because that is when anxious dogs generally shut down. They lose speed, drive, motivation. They don't enjoy it. So the guides just stop that from happening as well, which is really, really helpful, especially when you're trying to basically get your dog to enjoy training more, enjoy the game more, stuff like that, because that is the point, isn't it? So that is weave guides. Now we're going to move on to the bar support for the wall and the long jump, okay? So you want to use these when the dog is dropping one or both back feet and clipping the wall or long jump, okay? So I have one of these for the wall. My wall hasn't actually come yet, but it's coming. It's coming in the April container from Gallican, I promise, coming. So you pop this on top of the wall. So for the wall, you pop it on the bricks. Long jump, you'd pop it on the top of that tallest section in the long jump, if you get what I mean. And yeah, you'd use it when the dog is dropping one or both back feet, so Arrow does this, and clipping the wall or long jump, okay? So it builds awareness around the back feet if it's slightly higher, and also if there's a bar there, it looks more like a normal jump because dogs are used to seeing a bar and jumping it, okay? So it makes the dog think of the piece of equipment as more like a jump, okay, which they have to clear. And also, again, made of really sort of, durable, giveable. It gives, nice soft material that's not going to hurt the dog if they do clip it. Very lightweight, very safe. So if they do clip it like they've been doing, then they're going to feel that bar there, and then they're going to think about it more next time, if that makes sense, because the bar just gives the piece of equipment a little bit more height, which, again, yeah, if they clip it, they're going to feel that bar, because, again, the wall and the long jump are literally soft. They're made of nothing. I don't even know what they're made of, like polystyrene, whereas a bar, it is plastic, but it's still not going to hurt. It's lightweight. There's nothing inside it. It is just lightweight plastic, bar. So they're going to feel that more than they're going to feel just the bricks or the long jump when they clip it. And it, like I said, it also adds a bit of height, so they're more likely to notice it when they clip it. And it just brings more awareness to the equipment, to the behaviour, if that makes sense. Okay, so you can also use it when the dog is jumping too low and hitting the wall or long jump with their front feet or chest. So I'd say the most common problem is when they're hitting it with their back feet. But also some dogs just jump too low to the ground with their, chest and head too low and hit the wall or the long jump with their front feet or their chest. Some dogs just plough into stuff, especially when they're so lightweight and they barely feel it. And even if they do, it creates no awareness. They almost don't notice it, okay? Especially dogs of a certain nature, they just plough through it and don't feel it, and they don't have any respect for it then, okay? So if they're just ploughing through it and hitting it with their front feet or chest, again, seeing the bar there will make them think more that they need to pick themselves up and send themselves over it correctly to clear the bar. And also, again, going back to my point, if they do the same thing with the bar there, they're going to notice it more and want to avoid it next time, okay? And also, you can use the bar support when the dog is taking off prematurely, okay? So if the dog's got early takeoff for these pieces of equipment, again, putting the bar there just brings more awareness to the piece of equipment, okay? And again, they think of it more as a jump, than, for example, wall or long jump. So this is especially helpful when maybe a dog has just learnt what a wall or long jump is. They've been doing jumps, but they're brand new to the wall and long jump. Maybe they're a bit like, oh, what is this? This is weird. Putting a bar on there just makes it a bit more similar to a jump, which they are already familiar with and can already execute correctly. Okay, so that is a bar support for the wall and the long jump. Now we'll move on to jump guide. The jump guide for backside slices and wraps, okay? So this attaches to the wing that mimics and follows the path that the dog takes when they're doing backside slices or wraps. So these are to be used when the dog is taking off prematurely for backside slices and therefore clipping the wing or the pole when they do that, okay? So this just helps really sort of show them the path that they need to take, because like I said, if they clip that wing or the pole, it is going to come down. Not only is that false, but the wing could also fall on them, fall on you, etc. And like I said, if you have to reuse that jump in other parts of the course, that is an elimination. So yeah, you really want to avoid doing that. You can also use it when the dog is wrapping too tightly around the wing on backside wraps and clipping it or the pole. Okay, so for example, you're asking for a backside wrap and the dog is basically trying too hard, bless its soul, to basically skim the wing and do it really tightly, which is what we ask of them, okay? But there also is a line. If they're doing it too tightly, they are going to skim the wing, and that makes them more likely as well, if they're cutting it that close to the wing, to hit that pole because they're so close to it, okay? And they're not giving themselves enough room to take off and land and keep their feet up properly, okay? So if the dog is wrapping too tightly, again, this guide just shapes their path, okay? So they can't go that close. And again, then muscle memory builds up, okay? So as they approach a backside wrap, they will get used to taking maybe an extra slight stride or half a stride out to be able to wrap the wing efficiently, okay, and not too tightly. And it also again builds respect for the wing. Like, yes, the dog wants to come tight around the wing, but it does not want to touch it, clip it, bash it, okay? There is that fine line between nice tight turns and again just not having any respect for the physical piece of equipment, because our dogs are not meant to touch these things ideally, okay, because it can come down. And that is not what we want. Also, the dog, if they're super tight when they're doing a backside wrap or slice, it's harder once they land, because it's going to be more effort for them to get over the pole if they're too tight, because they have to be springing up when they're jumping instead of springing up and across, if that makes sense. It's going to be harder for them to, correct it as they land and set off, accelerate from that behaviour when they do land to the next part of the course. So it is also time saving as well. But yeah, often for backside slices, dogs can take off too early or too late, for example. So again, that just shapes their path. So when they go round the guide, they're in the optimal place for takeoff, to ensure they clear the jump and perform the behaviour as efficiently as possible. And also to make sure they do it in the way that's kinder on their bodies as well. That is a big thing too. Okay, so the jump guide for the backside behaviours like slices and wraps are really helpful. Again, just to encourage that optimal line, and your dog will figure out the striding, the approach they need to do that and match that guide. And then when you eventually phase it out and remove it, again, they'll have that muscle memory. They'll be used to approaching it and taking off and stuff like that in a certain way. And finally, the last one I'm going to talk about today is the stride guide for tight turns, okay? So this is like a panel, a slightly curved panel. And again, don't need to talk much about this because it is what it says. You use it when the dog is wrapping too tightly around the wing on wraps and clipping it or the pole, okay? So if the dog's clipping the wing or the pole on normal wraps, so they're taking the face side of the jump and wrapping round, but they're doing so too tightly or they're taking off too early or too late, again, this just shapes their line back around the wing. Okay, and again, it's very similar to the jump guide for backsides. It's just shaping that optimal line. Okay, that is all it is. I say all it is. It's a little thing that just will make a big difference if it's something your dog struggles with. Okay, so they're all the training aids I'm going to talk about today. Also, disclaimer, now I've spoken about these, don't think that even if your dog is doing it fine, that you have to go and use all these things now. You don't. Training aids are for dogs that are struggling with a certain behaviour or piece of equipment and not performing it optimally. Okay, if it's not broke, don't fix it. Don't add a training aid into something that's absolutely fine. Okay, it's if you're getting these issues, even sometimes, it is worth popping in a training aid and seeing if it helps your dog correct the behaviour, essentially. But yeah, don't just think because they exist you have to use them. Like I said, if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if you are struggling or you're noticing something that's not quite right, or you just want to improve something, like it's working but it's not optimal, you know it can be done better, quicker, more optimally, whatever like that, then that's when you pop a training aid in. But they are very helpful, and I think a lot of people don't use them to the extent that they can be used. I think a lot of people don't even realise they're a thing, or maybe they do but they're not sure how or when to use them. So I hope that cleared some of that up today. If you want any more explanation, any more of an explanation about any of the training aids I covered today, please just send me a DM over on social media at Paws and Pursuit. I would love to give you any more info or answer any more of your questions. Or if there are any other training aids that you would like me to talk about, or want a bit more info on, I can do a part 2. So again, just message me those training aids you would like me to talk about if there's any more you can think of, or maybe you've used before, or, even if your dog is struggling with something and there isn't a training aid that exists for that problem, please do message me, because it is something that I could potentially bring to Safe Stride Solutions, because I am now working with Safe Stride Solutions. I did speak about this in last week's episode, I believe, or the one before. I think it was last week's episode. And Safe Stride Solutions are essentially a Swedish company who make safe and effective training aids for agility. And I'm working with them. So yeah, any suggestions for training aids that don't exist, that you think would benefit a certain problem or piece of equipment, please do send me your suggestions. If you would like to purchase any of the training aids from Safe Stride Solutions, you can use my link to do so, which will be in the description of this podcast episode. Like I said, I have so many of Safe Stride Solutions products, and they are amazing. They are helping Arrow and also helping my students and their dogs as well. Just get better at all the little things, because like I said, agility is so fast these days, so fast. So we want everything to be as optimal as possible, and of course as safe as possible as well. So like I said, it's a double whammy. If we can improve our results in agility by eking out those extra seconds, milliseconds, happy days, but also the main thing is a lot of these training aids do also help the dog perform behaviours and pieces of equipment more safely on their bodies as well, minimising the risk of extra strain or crashes, etc. So please do check out their products on the website. Like I said, it's going to be in the description of this podcast episode. Please do give it a look. And I think that is everything today, guys. What am I up to in the next week, you ask? I have Y Champ on Saturday, and it's my first year ever competing at Y Champ, so I'm very excited. Another champ show to give a go, so I might see some of you guys there. Never been before, so very, very excited to see what that's like. We will be going down Friday and staying in another hotel, which will be another little few days away, and then competing on the Saturday, and then having a nice chill day of nothingness on Sunday, which I'm also very excited for, because life is busy at the moment, guys. Life is very, very busy. But that is all from me today, guys. So like I said I always say this in my little outro, but I did say it earlier on today's episode. Please do give me a follow on all the social media platforms at Paws and Pursuit or Summer Clark, especially Instagram. I'm always on there. You can keep up to date with me and Arrow, and everything that we've got going on in our lives as well over there. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do leave the podcast a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That would mean the absolute world to me. Also, make sure you're following the podcast on any of the platforms that you basically listen to your podcasts on. I know there's loads these days, but the most common ones are Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Therefore, if you do that, you will not miss any future episodes. I have lots of exciting guest ideas for future episodes, so make sure you're following so you don't miss them. Also, please do keep sending me your podcast topic requests and recommendations. So, solo episodes, what do you want me to talk about on my own in episodes? And also, guests you would like to see on the or hear on the podcast in the future, and what you would like me to talk about with those guests. Like I said, if you send in a request and recommendation, you are pretty much guaranteed to get your your request turned into an actual episode, because, like I said, I'm just that nice to you guys, aren't I? So I think that is everything I say in my little ramble. Like I always say, and I said at the start of this episode, I do offer in-person agility training in Lincoln, LN6 postcode. So please do pop me a message if you are interested. I would love to chat to you guys. But without further ado, I will let you get on with the rest of your Wednesday and week. I will probably see some of you at Y, so see you there if you're also there. But if not, I will chat to you all next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Bye, guys.